This is Jerome Corsi, and today is Monday, May 22nd, 2023. We're going to cover quite a few stories today. There's a lot going on. Let's start out with a story on Ukraine. Over the weekend, it was reported that the head of this private Russian military group, the Wagner Group, has reported that the city of this town of Bakhmut, which the Ukrainians and Russians have been fighting over for weeks, fell to Russia. The operation to capture Bakhmut lasted 224 days. This is what the head of the Wagner Group said. That Wagner Group is, by the way, a very powerful group. It's also fighting for Russia in Africa. The operation ended at noon. I guess this was a couple of days ago, and Bakhmut is fully captured. Now, this is a major setback for Ukraine because Ukraine was saying that they would have an offensive. They would retake Bakhmut. There's a massive loss of territory. Ukraine has basically rejected cities. Still, the city has fallen, but it's being internationally reported. And I don't think Ukraine is going to take back territory, even in the offensive coming on. So the Russian forces have really got complete control of all aspects of the city, and they began transferring control from the Wagner Group to the Russian military, which will now take over. This, I think, is a major victory for Russia because Russia has made a concerted effort to take this city in Bakhmut. It's a strategically important city. It kind of consolidates Russia's control of eastern Ukraine. And as the Russian troops began to rotate into the city, gaining ground on the city's flanks, the momentum shifted in this battle. So in the final kind of hours, Ukraine essentially capitulated, and the Wagner Group took over. Now, this is the same time that Zelensky, the head of Ukraine, is on the G7 trip to Japan. And of course, he's asking for more money and more weapons to fight this war. And it's going to become more difficult as Ukraine continues to suffer setbacks. It's clearly a proxy war. It's clearly a war that's being fought with US dollars, with NATO dollars, EU dollars, and weapons. And Russia, I think, could easily win if we weren't supporting Ukraine. It's an extremely dangerous war, and I'm not in agreement with the current date. I'm not a Putin fan. I think Putin is dangerous and has to be contained, but I think our idea of destabilizing Ukraine goes back to Hillary Clinton in 2013 when she was working with this Russian oligarch Pinchuk, who was giving her millions and millions of dollars through the Clinton Foundation in order to get rid of Yanukovych, who was a duly elected president in Ukraine at the time, but Russian supporting. That led to the Maidan Rebellion in 2014. The State Department has basically been destabilizing Ukraine since 2014. I think this war actually began at that time, and I trace it back to that far. Okay, let's go to the second story I want to cover here today, which is going to continue on the theme here for a minute of Ukraine, because we have another Ukrainian story, which I found very disturbing. But the reality is that the Ukrainian government is admitting finally, this was a senior Ukrainian official who was Ukrainian Major General Budanov, Budanov, who admitted the country, Ukraine, has killed quite a few, just quote, quite a few, not specified as a precise number, Russian civilians who support Putin and his war to control the Donbass region, which is in eastern Ukraine, very, very much affiliated with Russia. Now, assassinating citizens, we've already successfully targeted quite a few people, said Budanov. He didn't mention any of the victims, but said there have been well-publicized cases everybody knows about. And since February 2022, the Ukraine invasion, several prominent supporters of Russia of the invasion have been killed or wounded in this campaign. One of the most prominent such attacks happened last August when a car bomb killed a journalist whose name was Darya Dagina, a woman, in a possible attempt to kill her father. And they basically blew up her car. This is, again, people are not getting the correct narrative about Ukraine. The correct narrative from the neocons is basically that Ukraine is freedom fighters and we have to support Ukraine in order to push back Russia. Well, the truth, I think, is that we're infringing on Russia's sphere of influence, getting NATO and Finland to join, getting Finland and Ukraine to join NATO, and that's only going to make Russia feel that they could lose their access to the Atlantic through Finland in the north, the Baltic Sea, or through Ukraine, the Black Sea, and the Mediterranean. And Russia's not about to lose that access. So I think we're seeing a new stage now of the Ukraine war where it's pretty clear that Russia is going to succeed. And I've reported even last week, I don't think that this so-called offensive or counteroffensive from Ukraine is going to capture much territory. I think basically the Ukrainians are stealing millions and millions of dollars, ramping up a very dangerous war, and have no real potential to win against Russia. Chris, would you like to comment?
And we're becoming a party to it. This nation has again sent, what, $300+ million in military aid just recently, one more time, while we're in the midst of our own financial troubles.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we keep shoveling money over there as if it were the solution to the problem. And we're dealing with one of the most corrupt nations in the face of the earth.
We're marks. We're apparently this nation has become a mark for actors like Vladimir Zelensky. Again, I'm not for either side on this one. I don't think the governments are any less than corrupt. However, I'm for the people of these nations who are caught in the middle of all of this.
Well, also, I think the corruption comes in Washington because a lot of this money is going to get stolen by various channels back through to the Bidens and others. We've seen enough evidence of their corruption to know that they are, using politics as a way to get personally enriched. And as the country descends to where, the Mitch McConnells with his wife, Elaine Chao, again, China has enormous influence over her. Her family's worth billions of dollars in China, provided she cooperates. Otherwise, the family and the wealth could disappear. China is not beyond using those kind of tactics. So I think the American people are just not really well informed or accepting of the fact that the corruption in Washington today, I've never seen it so massive and on both sides of the aisle. Let's continue reporting. The next story I want to cover is this World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is wanting to get international rights over sovereignty, where of course, the World Health Organization is largely controlled by China again, and they want to be able to have the ability to declare an emergency, and then the World Health Organization is in charge and can make directions to national governments. We join this treaty or this agreement, Washington would be included. Now, the World Health Director is saying health and emergencies should include poverty and global warming. So we could take over the U.S. economy to prevent global warming, which I've maintained now for years. Wrote the book, The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change. And they've been writing articles in American Thinker trying to explain to everyone that global warming is a hoax. The science is not there. We are not destroying the earth by burning hydrocarbon fuels. But essentially, shortly after May 19th, this WHO Director General Tedros issued a report to the member nations saying that while, quote, the reemergence of epidemic-prone diseases continues to accelerate, the World Health's mandate regarding health emergencies must extend beyond pandemics to include hunger, poverty, ecological degradation, climate change, and social and economic inequalities. Essentially, through the idea of health or ending poverty, which I guess they're redefining as a health issue, or climate change as a health issue. And fundamentally, I guess you could define everything as a health issue. The World Health, the WHO, the World Health Organization, plans to escalate China's ability to control the globe through declaring emergencies and again having emergency powers, which could include again lockdowns. It could include freezing of currencies. It could include whatever they decide to have it include. Shutting down cities, preventing people from using automobiles. I mean, they not eating meat, denying that meat can go on the market. Any of the crazy ideas or hoax overreactions that the left can come up with for control. This is all about social control. It's all about totalitarianism. It is not really about health emergencies or ending poverty. If anything, this will only exacerbate the differences between those who are very, very wealthy, the oligarchs who don't have to follow all these rules, and all the rest of us who are going to be into the great unwashed beyond as the middle class is destroyed. Now, there's two articles I want to cover here on global warming and this whole issue. Exxon came out with a, I think, very important statement, which is in this ESG, this world of, basically using climate change regulations to decide who can be invested in, only investing in companies that are climate sensitive. Well, what we're seeing here is a pushback by Exxon saying that the prospect of achieving world net zero carbon emissions by 2050 is remote and should be further reevaluated. Exxon said the world is not on a path to achieve net zero emissions in 2050, as limiting energy production to levels below consumption demand would lead to a spike in energy prices. Europe has seen this following the oil sanctions against Russia and Ukraine. Exxon is saying that the transition to green energy, which could cost $150 trillion in the next 27 years, is uncertain because we're not yet transitioning. We are still increasing our use of hydrocarbon fuels. Unless we dramatically reduce the standard of living across the world, and especially in the United States, in 15-minute cities, you can't go out any more than 15 minutes from where you live. You have to walk. You have to use an electric vehicle. You can't have a gas stove. They put in a meter in your house. You're using too much electricity to stay warm in the winter. These people will control everything about your life because essentially is a depopulation agenda. This is the whole point of my book on the energy, global warming, and climate change, which I'm pointing out is not based on climate science. It's based on ideology. Basically, the whole idea that hydrocarbon fuels are wrong. They're not fossil fuels. They're readily available, and we need to utilize them abundantly in order to maintain the modern industrial state. Chris, would you like to comment on this?
It's painfully obvious to anybody who is not out in the ivory towers, who works every day, who has to live with these regulations and ideas that these global elites or the backpatting bureaucrats in Washington are trying to, or Albany at this point, are trying to push on us. This is not going to happen by 2050. There will be enough people who don't want to lower their standard of living just because a bunch of people want to. Even this guy's figured it out.
Yeah, right. Captain Obvious, yeah.
But for some reason, people have signed in or gone all in on this cult of, well, I would say religion, if you will, cult or religion of climate change, where they believe anything that they're being told, and even if it changes just a bit, they'll follow like sheep.
It's a secular religion. It's an ideology. It's not prone to debate. And whatever happens, we get a tornado, climate change. It gets a snowstorm, climate change. It's always climate change can mean anything. Climate change is weather. The weather changes all the time, and sometimes the weather is extreme. That's the way the Earth's system has worked for eons. It's not going to stop that way. But what I'm seeing is we're increasingly being set up for another crash, another pandemic, another crisis. What the global leaders have learned is that in a crisis, people will surrender freedoms and they can implement massive change, a lockdown. They can have a a vaccine program. They can demand vaccines. Now they're, of course, saying, oh, we didn't demand the vaccines. Well, of course they did. If you wanted to travel, if you wanted to um, go to a sporting event, if you wanted to do virtually anything, you had to have been vaccinated. Otherwise, you were going to be in lockdown. So again, another crisis is on the horizon, and I've been predicting that we'll have a massive economic downturn, and it's happening soon with all the credit that's out there in the world. We're going to see a collapse in the commercial real estate market in the coming months, certainly through the summer and fall. By the fall, I think this will be severe, and I'm recommending people solidly not be in the stock market because I think it could crash dramatically. That's why, again, if you'll, for just a second, please go to our sponsors, the black bar in the upper right. One of them, the two that I want to stress right now very quickly. One is Swiss America. If you'll take advantage of this silver dollar, gold, this is a 50-cent piece that was minted, Liberty, walking Liberty $half, and it's a very high content of silver. It's a one-time offer, introductory offer. You can buy 250 of them at about their cost in silver. And Matt McMillan, who is doing the McMillan Agency and doing annuities and universal life with us, which are going to do very well in a high interest rate environment. And we're not about to drop from a high interest rate environment. Now, to continue, another energy story I want to cover today is that Finland has just opened up a nuclear power plant. It had been delayed and delayed and delayed until this current energy crisis in Europe, and they decided to finish it. And the reactor going active in Finland saw an energy reduction in price by more than 75%. The plant completed the transition from testing to regular output last month and became Finland's first new nuclear power plant in more than 4 decades. It's going to produce up to 15% of the country's power demand. While the production is still in the early days, getting going, the launch already has reduced prices of energy, the energy spot price, from 245 euro per megawatt hour in December to 60 euro per megawatt hour in April, is a reduction of more than 75%. Energy prices had risen sharply in Finland after the government banned electricity imports from Russia's neighboring Finland, due to the conflict in Ukraine. So the utilization of nuclear power is welcomed by the Finnish consumers, given the fact that Finland has the highest per capita electricity consumption in the EU, largely because of the temperature and the need to heat Finland. And it's another indication that this whole leftist agenda does not want a solution. If the world went to nuclear energy, which can be made to be much safer than it was when we had Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, we could, in fact, end this insane push for wind, solar, and battery, which are not going to be sufficiently powerful to give us the cheap energy we need to support a modern industrial state. So the spokespeople are saying that the wind power is getting a lot of investment and nuclear is being blacklisted. But he says basically nuclear, it seems, not very attractive for the investors. That's what they say, but it's an option. And I'm sure one our politicians would be in favor of, because basically people are saying, who dares put billions of dollars into nuclear? But when it reduces the cost of electricity for the average person this dramatically, there's going to be a push for it. Last month, Poland secured $4 billion in U.S. funding to help build 20 small modular nuclear reactors across the country, while Hungary is focusing on expanding one of its existing nuclear power plants. But essentially, what you're seeing is that high inflation, high energy costs are causing a decline in industrial output in the EU and the United States, which in turn causes unemployment, leads to a situation where we're going to have essentially a stagflation. The inflation is going to continue because we continue to spend trillions of dollars that we don't have in deficit spending. That's going to stimulate and cause and continue to cause inflation. But at the same time, with the high cost of energy, with the government policies going into place, which are not controlling inflation, we're going to see stagflation, which is an unusual combination of inflation and economic stagnation. The middle class is going to be increasingly squeezed. And when a debt crisis happens, it's going to come very fast and very severely. And you could see massive numbers of bank failures because when banks have to mark their assets to market, in other words, they own a lot of treasury bonds that were bought when interest rates were kept by the Federal Reserve near zero in the Obama administration. What are those bonds worth today? They have to be sold at a deep discount, and that's going to be extremely detrimental to the asset position of the bank. The bank has a poor asset position, assets in relationships to the liabilities. The bank is insolvent, and I think the plan is essentially to get rid of a large number of community banks and regional banks to consolidate possibly with 5 large banks like JP Morgan, Chase, the behemoths, and they will, together with the Federal Reserve, begin dictating economic policy. We're moving towards a multinational corporation-controlled, big bank-controlled environment, which the middle class, small business, have really no say and get pushed out. It's a very, very difficult social engineering experiment we're going through, and it's, I think, kind of frightening. Now, the last one I want to cover, and I want to spend a little bit more time on this. China has what they call a Belt and Road Initiative. Essentially, they're building highways and infrastructure that connects China to Central Asia to Europe. In the north, it goes essentially down through Southeast Asia, South Asia, India, etc. Connects again to Europe up by France. They're through the Mediterranean Sea. Essentially, China is building a Chinese infrastructure from China across the Mediterranean, down through Southeast Asia and into Indonesia, South China Sea, all the way into Europe. This is again part of China's dominance plan. China essentially saying it wants to control the world. Now, at the same time, China, which has loaned simply trillions of dollars to build this Belt and Road Initiative, has been very, I think, secretive about how they wanted to do it. There's an article this week in Fortune which shows that China has dozens of countries into which they made loans to build this Belt and Road Initiative. The loans were initially private, but as they default, they become public. So the Associated Press is reporting that about a dozen countries indebted to China: Pakistan, Kenya, Zambia, Laos, Mongolia, found that paying back this debt to China is consuming an ever greater amount of the tax revenue needed to keep schools open, provide electricity, pay for food and fuel, and it's draining their foreign currency reserves, which reduces their ability to engage in international trade. Now, when China calls these loans in, they're unwilling to forgive the debt. It's China's plan essentially to say, well, we'll forgive the debt if you let us own the Belt and Road Initiative. If you let us essentially sell your country to China, because if you can't repay the debts, China wants assets for it. So that the Associated Press is saying that these countries that are in this situation had as much as 50% of their foreign loans from China, and more were devoting as much as a third of their government revenue to paying off foreign debt. 2 of them, Zambia and Sri Lanka, have already gone in default, unable to make even the interest payments on the loans, on the construction of the ports, the mines, the roads, the power plants, everything China wants to put this infrastructure in place. In Pakistan, millions of textile workers have been laid off because the country has so much foreign debt. It can't afford to keep on the electricity and keep the machines running. In Kenya, the government has held back paychecks to thousands of civil service workers to save cash to pay the foreign loans. The president's chief economic advisor tweeted last month, salaries or default, take your pick. Sri Lanka defaulted a year ago. 500,000 industrial jobs have vanished. Inflation has pierced 50% and more than half of the population. It's up 50% or more. More than half the population in many parts of the country has fallen into poverty. And unless China softens its plan, which I don't think they will, we're going to get more and more political upheaval. So in Zambia, which is landlocked, it's got about 20 million people in southern Africa. They borrowed billions of dollars from China to build state-owned banks, dams, rivers, roads. And the loans boosted Zambia's economy and raised foreign interest payments so high that there was little left for the government, forcing it to cut spending. Governments had to cut spending in healthcare, social services, and subsidies for farmers, seed, fertilizers, etc. So essentially, China is not playing by the rules. It is not engaging in multinational talks. It's not negotiating with countries like Zambia. It's basically saying the loan is due, pay it, or China is coming in and demanding assets. So the refusal to essentially comply with China with this much debt is not a good situation. China is unwilling to take losses in the hundreds of billions of dollars it owed. And as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have urged China to take losses, instead, many countries are on a treadmill of paying back interest, which stifles growth and reduces the money they could use to pay back the debt they're paying it off in interest. And these countries lose their foreign cash reserves. They've dropped in a dozen countries, down an average of about 25% in a year, which means that they are unable to really participate in international trade. So China's essential response is saying to the IMF and the World Bank that they call on these institutions to actively participate. And basically, China wants to be paid. And China has forgiven some no-interest loans, but in general, China is demanding the payback of its loans and the grabbing of assets. Chris, any comments?
Let's put it in simple terms. These countries are like, remember the old mafia movies where the big boss hands out a loan and the little guy, the business owner says, I don't know if I can handle this. Can you forgive some of this, or can you knock down some of this? Like, all right, I'll do a favor for you, but one of these days I'm going to call in a favor. China's
Right.
calling in those favors, and this is what it's going to look like.
Yeah, and for all these countries that China has lent money to are now going to be subservient to China.
They have
China
to be. Yeah.
all major assets in them, and many of these countries have rich mineral assets, which China is going to mine. China is beginning to plan to sell electric vehicles in the United States at a cheap price. China controls the solar panel market and the battery market, and our politicians are controlled by China as well. I mean, the situation I'm seeing going on right now is that the world is in economic crisis, which is fast moving towards a crash. Crash is going to be catastrophic, and it will affect all Americans because, again, our own ability to sustain debt. I'm encouraging people to get out of debt, encouraging people to do what they can to prepare for an economic downturn more severe than we saw in 2008, 2009. Right now, the price of gasoline has stabilized, but as we get into winter, especially if the EU continues to maintain its green policies, the Biden administration has virtually every department of the U.S. government working on climate change. I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. military's objectives doesn't become climate change. That are, the other social objectives more important ideologically to the Democrats than national defense. I think we're going to see Robert Kennedy begin to continue to ascend in his influence in the Democratic Party. I don't think the Democrats want him. Democrats are neo-Marxist. He's not a Marxist. In the Republican Party, I think Donald Trump will be facing a lot of obstacles. DeSantis seems, as I've kind of predicted, to be yet young and inexperienced. And I'm increasingly predicting that Obama will be planning to run Michelle for president. And if he does, and she agrees, I think the staging is there. She's written a book. She's on a book tour. She's following Obama's plan, saying, I don't really want to be president, but if you need me, I guess I will be president. That act has already started. And it seems to me that with Michelle as a candidate, the Republicans are going to have a very, very hard time beating her. And if we have another 4 or 8 years of Marxism, this country is going to be radically different and weakened dramatically by the end of that time, as it has been since really 2008, when I opposed Barack Obama by writing the book Obama Nation, pointing out to people that he had been Marxist trained by Frank Marshall Davis in his life. He had been raised in Islam by his stepfather in Indonesia, and he was not pro-American. We've had a series of presidents who are not acting in America's best interests, and Donald Trump was an exception, and the left went insane with Donald Trump and did everything possible to get rid of him. Chris?
I could see the Democratic primary now with Michelle Obama running. These Democrats I guess they don't have great candidates, but they're going to try to run. Joe Biden and them are going to say, hey, what kind of experience do you have, Michelle Obama? She'll say, well, I was running the country for about 8 years. At this point, make it 11.
If Obama's behind the scenes and the power behind Biden, he's just had his third term, and he might be going for a fourth and fifth.
I'll never forget when I was watching 60 Minutes before Barack Obama was elected. The 60 Minutes crew, whoever was interviewing him, did a nice big puff piece on him and Michelle. He is always smiley. He's friendly. He seems always accessible. She had this awful scowl during a good portion of the interview, and it was very, very noticeable. Obviously, nobody would pick up on or discuss that. The fact that she had this huge scowl on her face during a lot of this interview between the two of them, it's almost like, hey, I want some spotlight, not this guy. And I just, that kind of ego with little experience, and she's been pretty much going to be an ideologue if she even runs for any kind of audience. It'll be a culture war thing, if anything else.
They've done a lot of softening of Michelle, at least to package her as an image, to make her look more friendly. But that doesn't mean that her intrinsic personality is any different than it was, in 2008. I think she is, of the two of them, just like Hillary was much more of a Marxist than Bill Clinton. I think that Michelle is even more of a Marxist, than is Barack. And getting rid of this Marxism in the United States is going to be a problem. It doesn't work. Electric vehicles don't work. Eating crickets doesn't work. Being able to turn on the lights doesn't work. Not being able to have food, employment, travel, the freedoms we've enjoyed, none of that works. But we're going into an engineered world where these globalist masters have decided that there's too many of us, and they need to have all the world's riches to them and their machines, and they'll be just fine. Well, that's a world if we enter that world, we're going to be into a very, very dark time, a time of lying and disinformation. And I'll continue to write more books. We're going to introduce a new sponsor this week, which is Eric Smith and Decision Technologies. We'll be having some special programs with our sponsors this week to highlight them. This is a tool that allows you to evaluate mutual funds. You can see your mutual fund, how it ranks with all others in class, dialing in what you want it to, what's important to you, long-term growth, return of various kinds in various years, etc. It's a very sophisticated tool. I think it's going to revolutionize the mutual fund industry. Also, take a look at My Vital C. People are saying I'm looking younger than I did when I was podcasting before. I'm still feeling very, very active in writing. Got new books coming out, and I attribute much of the change in feeling more alive and energetic to this Carbon 60, My Vital C. They've also got products for cats and dogs. Try it through our website, clicking the purple links. If you like the program, please support us. We also have the Truth Central store open. You can get mugs and gear at thetruthcentral.com in our store. And please do support us by getting this logo seen across the country. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Today is Monday, May 22nd, 2023. In the end, God always wins. God will win here too. Could be a difficult go, but God will win. And let's hope and pray and be on God's side. In the spirit of 2 Chronicles 7:14, we do need to pray. If we do, God will intervene. This is not so dark it can't be turned around. It can be turned around. And God knows how to do that if we implore and ask and beg forgiveness for allowing things to get to this dark point. Dr. Jerome Corsi will be back tomorrow. Every day we're going to be broadcasting in the weekdays. Thank you for joining us. God bless.